this is going to focus on the actual private sector entities that want to liaison and be a part of emergency management throughout the full life cycle, from preparedness, protection, response, recovery, mitigation, all the way through. So that being said, first I want to discuss what we have as far as at the federal level, and it's good to have the National Business Emergency Operations Coordinator at the table as part of the panel, Ron Robbins. I'm going to have him speak a little bit here in a second about FEMA's Private Sector Representative Program. In the regions, several FEMA regions, which there are 10, have an actual private sector liaison sit in the Regional Response Coordination Center, which is like an operations center when it's activated for an incident. Some have them physically there, some it's a virtual tie-in, as FEMA Region 4 is with, very similar to what the Florida Division of Emergency Management and ESF 18 does with their virtual BEOC. And then also we're finding a lot of counties, and I think Florida is leading the nation in business and industry, its own emergency support function, and looking at what other states, and I think that's why we have other states here this week to look at what Florida's doing, but then also to really get their thoughts of where they are in the process with their business EOCs, a private sector seat by itself in the EOC. And so there are a lot of things happening, and then of course, as was mentioned in the last hour in that other session, of mentorship, big business to small business, or businesses across the nation that maybe do the same thing. And if it's impacted in Florida, there's maybe a company in California that, hey, we've gone through something similar based on your sector and your experience, and this is how we've weathered the storm per se and how we can help out. So that being said, I'm going to first turn over to Ron Robbins, and he's going to give an overview of what FEMA's Private Sector Representative Program is in DC.
Thanks, Phil. Again, I'm Ron Robbins, and I'm newly assigned to FEMA approximately 4 months ago, and one of my priorities and main tasks, if you will, is to operate the National Business Emergency Operations Center. And what that is, from the 50,000-foot view, is it's a clearinghouse of information in exchange between private sector companies with the intent that we collect situational awareness from the large-scale private sector and small and medium-sized businesses, and collect that information, operating status, capabilities, collect all that information and share that with stakeholders. What we do through the outreach, through the private sector liaisons through the regions, is a mechanism/outreach tool to get to the states and to the local emergency response folks, and provide that clearinghouse of information and that conduit from the federal level all the way through the region to the state, down to the state, local, and tribal entities, and to provide that information to them and provide situational awareness. So what we try to do is to collect situational awareness from our large-scale stakeholders, which right now we have approximately 370 plus companies that sign agreements with us that they're going to exchange information, and that their information that they give us it has all of the legal representation in there that says that it's foiable, it can be looked upon and looked at through different mechanisms, if you will. So it's basically, it's free-flowing information that they are giving to us that we say that we are going to share with our partners. So there is some level of trust there that we have about what we're collecting from them. We try to collect not so much the granularity of the onesie-twosies information, but we try to collect what I call shortcomings or gaps, so that we can provide that to the leadership at the NRCC when we activate there, that we provide that to the leadership in hopes that helps the logistics folks shape their response. It lets them know where the private sector is at, where they're situated, what problems they are having, so that it can help shape the response piece of that. So that's in essence what we do. And some of the outreach mechanisms that we're working on right now are some webinars. I have some notes here. We just stepped off last week where we have some BEOCs that we communicate with, the knowns as I call them right now. What I'm doing is I'm bringing resources to bear to create a platform. That's the resources I bring. I can bring the audience together with the partners, the knowns that we have, and trying to bring online the the folks on the peripheral that are trying to find their way about BEOCs and what the advantages of them are, to bring them on board on a platform, in a cross-sharing platform, on a webinar, to communicate with those that have started this and they are forging ahead, so they can share some of their best practices and network with those that are doing BEOCs and are already out into those waters. So it's basically, as I look at it, it's bringing the people together, and I think that's where we really gain a lot of traction and a lot of momentum, is when we have the knowns sharing with the unknowns some of their best practices. And so it's a good cross-cutting information sharing platform. And what we're doing now, since we had that first one, it's now we're able to collect talking points and discussions, and it helps us frame the outline for the way ahead on what we want to do, and we're going to share that framework with all of our regional private sector liaisons for them to chop on that, and so they can communicate with their folks and find out what it is that their needs are, so it's not just a dream from my end up at the top to figure out what I think you need. We need to hear from you folks what you need to hear and what you need to talk about, so that I can help try to facilitate that discussion and get the right people on the wire to talk about those kind of things. And we have a lot of technology capabilities and to be able to do that. So I bring the resource piece and the audience, I hope, to cultivate that discussion. And so that's kind of where we're stepping off right now. And again, this is in concert with the regions too. This isn't just something that we're jumping over and right down to the states. We want their input on it, and we share that information so that they can collect it from their folks. And just a little bit on the private sector representative. What that is basically is we try to reach out to companies that would be willing to give up somebody from their organization to come work at FEMA, to work side by side with us, to share with them from whichever sector they come from, to share their knowledge, expertise, and how we can better interact with that company, that sector, if you will, to provide that guidance, and for them to be able to share their capabilities and what information and how to work with their sector from wherever it is that they come from. As Phil mentioned, right now we have a private sector representative sitting in Region 9 and 10. His name is Mark Soul. He's Vice President at Wells Fargo for emergency preparedness, emergency management. And he brings a wealth of knowledge from the financial sector, which he's able to share with us and give us insight as to some of the inputs that they need and what their folks are looking for and what they bring to bear in a disaster and a response, that we are able to then share that information with our logistics planning folks and the folks that do the future planning at FEMA, so they get an insight into the financial sector because of his tie-in with FEMA during that 90-day stint that they do, to share that with them and with us. So it's a good cross-sharing. And the companies, usually it's a 90-day rotation, and they come to us at FEMA at no charge. It's all, the companies bear all the brunt of that expense, and we appreciate their input to that and their relinquishing of the individual that comes to us to do that. And we also try to get them at the headquarters level so we can get them interacting with the leadership there. But it also has to do, we have to somewhat accommodate them as well, and we're finding now that maybe sitting out in the region actually works better for them, because it keeps they can stay tied to their normal day-to-day while they're away from their organization for 90 days. So we cross-talk that information when we talk with the companies, and now we do outreach, and we do when folks are interested in coming to us, we have a dialogue, we have a web conference with them so that we get their input as to what they expect to get out of the agreement and what we expect. So we do a little bit of cross-sharing there so that it turns into a win-win situation for everyone involved. And then we both leave there
thank you, Ron.
better than where we started at. So
keep trucking here.
Okay, all right.
I'm looking at a lunch crowd, and I'm like the piece of meat.
He can take the whole
Sorry.
Thank you, though.
Okay.
I'm going to quickly go to Tim Cole, who is a regional liaison for FEMA, and then I'm going to touch with the states of Illinois, then, of course, here in Florida, and open it up so we can get the county official information as well as the private sector, because it's really about what the private sector, how they want to become involved. So, Tim.
Real quickly, there are 11 regional private sector liaisons inside the 10 FEMA regions. You're fortunate to have in Phil the strongest, most experienced private sector liaison out of a FEMA region. In Region 6, I do three things. I have and build real relationships with private sector. Mitch came out to see me, and we began talking about Waffle House across Region 6 states. I help states build private sector capability, and you saw earlier Kelly was here from Oklahoma. We're helping our states develop a public-private partnership, however that works, BEOC, private sector seat, public-private partnership, however it works. And then finally, I spend a lot of my time educating in-house my own FEMA folks and the federal folks on what real whole community and public-private partnership can and should look like across all our mission areas: response, recovery, mitigation, and preparedness. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. So, Edie, we're going to go to Illinois for what the state's doing as far as private sector engagement, the seat that you have in the EOC, and so forth.
Okay, thank you, Phil. So 2007 is when we first started our public-private partnership relationship, running around the state, establishing partnerships, contacts with companies that were interested in associations. In 2008 is when we started our private sector liaison program at the State Emergency Operations Center. So the private sector liaison, even though the companies rotated in and out based on their availability and how quickly they could get to the EOC during activation, they sat shoulder to shoulder with the other public sector liaisons and address the issues, taking off the hat of their specific company and serving as a private sector contact. That was rather new for our state, and it took a while to get some adjustment. Since that time, we've moved on to recognizing what exists across the state of Illinois at a local, county, regional, and statewide, different types of partnerships. And finally, we established a Business Emergency Operations Center in 2011, and we tested it out during one of our state-level exercises. And since that point in time, we still have a very active BOC, but we also, and I just throw this out for consideration, have the private sector liaison at our State Emergency Operations Center, keeping in mind they're 5 feet across from each other when they're both physically activated. So any thoughts anybody would have about, is it important to still keep that private sector person within the SEOC versus having the assets or the representatives in the BOC would be of interest to us, because we're kind of at that crossroads right now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Edie. We're going to go to Larry next. I know we've touched on this, what Florida does with ESF 18, but as far as what you see as far as private sector liaisons, from the private sector liaison with the state and with counties.
Yes, currently in Florida with ESF 18, we think we got pretty good representation, cross-representation of the business community in Florida with over 25 private sector organizations, state government agencies that's involved with work with the private sector. But we took a look at the ESF 18 and the types of organizations that we had at ESF 18 about a year ago in consultation with Director Coons, and the decision was made that we would even try to broaden the number of private sector organizations that we had representation at ESF 18. So we had some dialogue with some of the associations, and we recently brought on the Florida Chamber, the Florida Bankers Association, the Florida Council of 100, and added them to our ESF 18 family, realizing that we wanted to broaden the scope of who we were being involved with in the business community in Florida, and we think that those were excellent additions to our ESF 18 family. But in addition to broadening the reach of ESF 18 through expanding the official organizations that's represented on ESF 18, we realized that if we have a catastrophic type of event, that we need to even have the outreach and the capability of having more representatives from the private sector actually involved in our ESF 18 activities. So we tested out the concept of kind of, I guess, replicating the program that was at the federal level. and we brought in a couple of private sector representatives, and when we were activated in ESF 18, Verizon, Tom had the opportunity of coming up, working with us in the ESF 18 room, along with the Bank of America representative. And as a result of those activities, we think that the concept works. We think that it's a win-win both for ESF 18 as well as the business community. It actually gives us the opportunity of having more hands on deck. And we saw that the representatives that actually came from the private sector, they was immediately beneficial in really being able to answer questions and to deal with private sector concerns in the State Emergency Operations Center. So we know that the concept works, but we have a challenge in engaging smaller businesses in this type of endeavor, realizing that they don't have the resources or the necessary manpower that they will be able to give up employees during the time of the disaster. So we got to figure out how we can better engage smaller size companies in our private sector initiative.
Thank you, Larry. And I'm going to call on Brad next from Escambia County. I want to get the county official feel, especially since they have Brace and Daniel Hahn has been here in a previous session this morning about Safer Santa Rosa, all that they're doing across the board. So Brad, while you think about that, then I want to, after we get the county official perspective on what they're doing with private sector liaisons, we have, of course, communications sector, financial sector here at the table. I know we got Waffle House with the food sector, and then Chris Summerose in the house from UPS for logistics. I want to kind of get their feel, because what we're going to look at as we get into the next few minutes is where does the private sector want to be involved in emergency management in all the different phases of it, and how do you want to be involved as an incident develops or a no-notice event? How do you want to be brought in as part of the team? We talk about the private sector like they're not even in the room sometimes, about a they thing versus about a we. So after Brad, I want to kind of get from the private sector where you see as far as being that liaison or being that part of the team, and then looking at how you're going to partner with the private or with the public sector, and then private to private, the mentoring, the how do we do a team. I know that's been a big drive. Even Sunday night we had a discussion about how does the private sector just get together and say, hey, how do we hash this out and work together as a team of businesses. So with that being said, Brad.
Thank you very much. From one bald guy to another. Go bald guys. We're taking over the world. As far as the county level, I think there's different tiers that we look at. Our concept is not unique in the state of Florida and probably not unique in many parts of the country, but with our ESF 18 folks, we're working hard with our Chamber of Commerce, Pensacola Chamber of Commerce, as well as our other chambers to try and build some capacity, if you will, that we can create those representatives the folks working in the OC to represent the business community and create that communication link. I just think for ESF 18, primarily it is, as we've all been saying, it's a communication thing that is utmost importance, as well as a little bit of that data sharing and information, what's going on in the business community to help steer what we do. Brace is a nonprofit, as Daniel Hahn has indicated, similar to SAFER in Santa Rosa County, that really is our lead for ESF 15 volunteers and donations, but they're also a part of ESF 18 because nonprofits are part of the business community. So working together, we're utilizing existing communication networks. We don't want to rebuild what's already out there. We've been able to convince our local chamber that there's a benefit to that. They are fully on board and realize those benefits for them as a chamber, but also to the business community, which again is just all helps that recovery process as well. So though it's not unique, we're still maturing. We haven't quite matured. We're continuing to work on those relationships. I think one piece that I think is a real benefit is the effort that the state and to some extent what the feds are doing. They're opening doors with the larger corporations that a local county could not do. We wouldn't be able to talk to Walmart, out in Benton, but the state is able to do that, and the feds are able to crack those doors. So that's, I think, is a benefit that funnels down to us. I do, from a county perspective, do ask, as those larger corporations do make those good solid connections with the state of Florida and the federal government, that they also communicate down to the local managers in the stores that are in the local communities. Sometimes they're well informed of what the corporation's doing at those various levels. Sometimes they're not. And having them know what's going on within their company already helps us work together a little bit better as well. So that'd be one of the requests, at least from the private side. I know Edie's question, I think the difference between your BOC and your county's EOC, or if you guys have a strong communication link, you could do it either way. If your EOC folks are not quite confident that a communication links during a disaster where tools may fail, and sometimes the way the command structure is, they like to touch and feel the people rather than being able to reach them on a phone. So I think it's more of an EOC command choice or preference. I think there's plenty of tools, and as long as you can communicate, I think you can do it either way. I don't see any hurdles with that other than just styles of management. But at the local level, that's what we're doing. We're still maturing. We still have a long way to go. We're absorbing a lot of the comments that everyone has, and the more we can get from the business side and what they would like helps us drive that direction as well.
Okay, thank you, Brad. So I know we have Anthony from financial sector here, and then Tom from communications and others in the room, and I saw Lewis from public, so we have that food sector as well and others in the room. I want to first go to Anthony and Tom to get their aspect. They're involved at all levels, and would like your thoughts.
Thanks, Phil. The one thing that we started here in Region 4 within Hillsborough County is we partnered with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and created a P3 organization, but it's a private-public partnership exchange. And really what we've done is it's for the private sector to benefit the private sector, and it's run by the private sector. So what we've done is we've taken the 16 critical infrastructure groups, and we've assigned 2 sector representatives from each group, financial, me being one, nuclear waste, communications. We've gotten sector representation from each group, and from there we've built our networks. We've asked each representative to build their network of peers, whether small or big, doesn't matter, and actually some of the representation for our sectors are small companies, where the CEO of the company actually sits on the board. So it's not just your emergency management, emergency response, or your crisis business resiliency people at the table, it's the business owners as well. And what we've done is we've tasked them with going out and building the network. So I don't have to go out and find the mom and pops. They've done that for me. We've built that network, and when it's time to communicate, we've gone out and said, okay, here's the message that we need to send. So what we did when we set this up with FDLE is we said, let's go through, and each individual that's representing, let's go through and list the 10 things that we want to find or we want from this collaboration. And what we found is that a lot of us want the same things. And the biggest things were communication, networking, and then, response, and then training. Those were the big things that we looked at, and those are the things that we said, okay, let's tackle these, and let's go through and let's move for a common goal on getting these accomplished. So this is a fairly new organization. We started this in 2014. 2015 is really my first term as director of the group. But what we've done is we've already established, utilizing the Florida Fusion Center Network SharePoint site as our information repository for Region 4. So that's where we're posting our information, our training initiatives, whether it's through RDSDF or through FEMA. And then we're working on, not mutual aid agreements, because those tend to bog us down when we actually have agreements, but at least having the contacts and saying, hey, Publix, I've got a banking center open. We can use that as a distribution point for water or for something else, or with Walgreens or whatever we may do. I have generation power. Come on out, let's see what we can do together to make it work. Or vice versa. Publix may say, hey, Tony, we're running low on cash. People forget financial sector, this is a capitalist market. You need money in your markets to be able to operate. It becomes a paper society when your networks and everything crash. So a lot of businesses may come and say, hey, how can we get cash? How can we get money back to our stores for operation? Okay, well, let me utilize some of my vendors to see if we can get you a shipment of cash. The big thing that I think we all need, and we've talked a lot about, the virtual BEOC, we've talked about different networks, is really the basis for anything we need is, can we get there, and is there power? And if there's not, from a large company perspective, I'll get my own power, just get me there. So, and then we can get up and running. And Chase, we want to do the right thing, and all companies are like this. You want to do the right thing for your business, but you also want to do the right thing for the community and be a good partner. You know, and I use an example. We've talked a lot about Sandy. You know, we opened up charging stations for everybody in New York. We didn't care if you're a customer or not. Come in, you can cool down, you can charge your cell phone, you can get communications back. That was just being a good public, a good partner, a good public partner. And what that, ended up in is good reputational value for the company. So it did, give us something in return. And you better believe we use that to our advantage. But at the end of the day, we thought it was just the right thing to do, and that's what we did. And I guarantee you a lot of the other companies out here would do the same thing. So, what we've done with the P3, and Lisa here is my partner within FDLE, is we've taken, the top-down approach and really enable the private sector to go out, build those networks, and then utilize them. And we don't have public sector representation at these meetings. We hold quarterly meetings. We have board of directors meetings. The only representative we have is from FDLE, and if we want someone from the public sector, FDLE will initiate that for us and bring them in. So we have found the model so far to be working. We're still building, and we hope it's a model that other regions will follow down the road. So thank you.
You need to understand something. We are not the enemy, okay? The public sector is not the enemy. We need to be working together. The day when the next hurricane hits Florida and we're not ready for it, shame on us, okay? So when the state offers the fact that, hey, private sector, come in and be a liaison for the next exercise, you should be jumping on it. Because you private sector people, you gotta understand, this is good for business, okay? It's good for my business. Verizon is a very active player in the state of Florida, okay? We have the state contract. We make available several hundred phones to the state of Florida during a disaster. We work on the advisory committee, working group with the state. We've got people, Verizon people in the EOC. It's good for the state of Florida for us to be active. It's good for Verizon. It's good for our business. If I can help the state of Florida stay in business, that's good for me, isn't it? Okay, so it's a win-win. So when we want to be engaging with the state, we want to say, yes, we're here and we're working with you very closely. Because it gives us good visibility, it offers good support, and it builds great partnerships, okay? So when we look at the liaison program, we walk in the EOC, I sat with Larry and Brian and Julie and some of the other folks. There was a ton of information that I learned. A lot of things that I learned from being in the EOC for 2 days, watching these guys work, understanding their language, their needs, allowing me to put in injects into the system, allowing me to walk around to the ESF people, the comms guys, the business industry, and everybody else in that room. Kind of a little free reign, but I had the opportunity to learn what they're all about, so I can be better prepared and know what the needs are when that next disaster hits. Because we've got to be more ready than we were for the last disaster. Down in southeast Florida, the last big hurricane was Wilma. All right, we took it on the chin. A lot of people have problems with communications, okay? We learned from that. We've enhanced our side of the game to help with communications. I'm glad to see that the state has enhanced their part of the game to allow the private sector to step up with them and be part of the solution, not part of the problem. There's a lot of value here with the liaison program. Any private sector person in here, you need to be engaged, at least on the phone, if not sitting in the EOC or whatever office they have set up for the next exercise. Are you doing an exercise this year, in 2015? Okay, they're doing another exercise. If my calendar permits, I will be there with them. I would expect to see you private sector people there working together with me, Larry, Julie, Brian, everybody else, solving the problems that are going to come up next. One other quick thought, the mentoring program, we talked about that before. Verizon and many large companies have stepped up and said, yes, we will be mentors for small businesses. The problem is that businesses haven't stepped up, okay? We need to use the tools that are out there. Steve Elliott, where are you? There he is in the back. Steve is the president of the local ACP chapter, okay? I want to work with Steve to talk getting some of his members engaged, or also get his members to say, yes, we'll be mentors also to help the small businesses. Because we all talk about small businesses, but who's helping them out? Okay? The company with 50 people doesn't have a disaster guy on staff. But I can give him 4 hours of my time and my expertise to say, let me write you a 5-page plan, a 10-page plan. There you go. Now you're 80% there, where yesterday you were only 0% there. If it's going to help that business succeed, it's good for the state, it's good for my business. Let's keep it going.
Good. Steve.
Tom, first of all, it'll turn on, huh? There we go. I'll slip you the $5 after the meeting also. Speaking on behalf of the Association of Contingency Planners, let me just clarify a little bit what Tom said. We are a nationwide, not-for-profit, professional business association of people in the private sector, the public sector, the NGO sector, who work in contingency planning, emergency management, and disaster recovery. We have chapters all across the United States, thousands of members. Here in the state of Florida specifically, we have 4 large chapters, one in Tampa, one in Orlando, one in Jacksonville, and one down in Tommy's neck of the woods in South Florida. Here in the Bay Area, just as a quick example, we've got about 70 members. Our members are made up of the largest companies here in the Tampa Bay region. If people were to come to us and say, we need some help building a program, I'm sure among our 70 members, we would find somebody that would be willing to do a quick read through and make some recommendations. The other thing that we offer to the community from a mentoring perspective is to go out and talk to other associations, particularly the SMB markets. I heard talk about the agriculture business. This is the kind of stuff we like to do, is to go out and offer our expertise as Fortune 500 business continuity people to say, these are the things we've experienced, let us give you some recommendation. And unlike some of the other folks who have spoken, I ought to throw in here, this is all totally free. We are not selling anything. We're not asking anybody to buy anything, except maybe lunch. But other than that, we will be delighted to come out and talk with different groups and help out any way we can. Thanks.
Can I add something in real quick, please?
Go ahead, John, yeah.
Not only, I just want to talk to the businesses in here, but not only engaging on the state level, but also make sure you're engaging at the local level too, because those decisions that impact you, whether it's the roads being closed, support services, that type thing, that's all coming from that local level. So one of the things that we do locally in Clay is obviously the Clay Chamber is who leads our ESF 18. All our business and industry information go through the chamber, and we even try to encourage a lot of the smaller businesses to get their information from them also. Now, speaking for some of the chambers, obviously, sometimes it's challenging for the little mom and pops to be a part of the chamber due to monetary contributions or whatever, but we still open the information sharing to all businesses in that. But the getting involved with training, as Tom said, whether it's incident command training, any type of emergency preparedness training, coming out to talk to your respective organizations, is be involved locally too, not just at the state level, because a lot of those decisions are going to be coming from local.
And that's key. Yes, sir.
I want to piggyback on what John just said, because this is something that I've experienced in a couple different realms. One, in the university higher education side of the house, and then moving over into private sector, which my footprint just grew astronomically, was building those relationships across the table with the local EMA. For instance, we had ice storms that went into Memphis. We had ice storms that went into Atlanta, primary locations for Raymond James. We had flooding and mudslides up in Detroit. And having those relationships already developed enabled us to reach out very quickly and talk with the EMA and say, what's the impact? How bad is it? Because this is what the media is portraying. Is my business location affected? What are you hearing on the street? Help us understand, because we're down here in St. Pete. It worked out beautifully. We were able to provide that information to senior leadership there, able to make some great decisions on whether or not they have to send a response team up there to deal with the incident. Do they have to take care of the associates that are in that location? And so we're able to make really great decisions. I'm going to mirror that with what just happened in San Francisco, where we had the storm of the century, if you will. We still have a lot of time to go, but for San Francisco, that was unprecedented. They hadn't seen anything like that in quite some time. We hadn't developed that relationship with San Francisco EMA yet. And so it was very difficult for me to dig and get information from them, especially when they don't know who you are. You're who? Raymond James in St. Pete, Florida? We don't know who you are. If you don't have that big footprint, Walmart, you're a big building, right? Raymond James might be 50 associates in an office building, but those people generate a lot of revenue for the firm. I need to make sure that they're safe. Tie that also to, I need to know that their homes are safe, because if that associate cannot come into work, then that's a problem for me. And so it's not just the business location, but I have to have a good appreciation for their home life as well. And so 40 plus states here across the United States that we have to be concerned with. I had to be concerned with Ebola overseas, moving into Europe because of Paris and London being affected. So you have to have that. You have to extend the arm. locally here, it's been great. I've been able to reach out to Sally Bishop here in Pinellas, similarly with other different footprints here in Miami-Dade, Orlando, in Jacksonville, where we're able to extend the hand across the table and say, hey, we want to work with you. Reach out to John. Because I have that relationship with the emergency managers here in the state, it helps us really get a good feel for what's going on. Bomb threats in Daytona at a Raymond James location. Those are things that we need to have a good pulse on. You have to extend the arm. Whether it comes, and I said this yesterday, whether it comes from the public into the private sector or the private into the public sector, it has to be there. Throw it back over into higher ed. And my colleague across the table there, Adam Colby, so not to monopolize the time here, but when I went over to USF, one of the first things that we had done together was reach out to all of the higher ed throughout the entire Tampa Bay area, about 42 institutions here in the Tampa Bay area, and say, we need to work together. And then also working through the professional organizations with FEPA and making sure that we could stand up a committee to address higher ed emergency management issues, and then talking with Brian and his liaison that we had up there at the state, helping to create that linkage from the state down to the local level here in the Tampa Bay area was critical. And Jeff Morgan now at UCF is carrying the helm on that. So, you have to have those relationships. Sharing the information across the table is going to be key, whether it be Verizon, whether it be Walmart, whether it be higher ed or the financial district. You've got to share that information across the table. And that's how you're going to start to bridge that gap and get recovery back online.
And I was going to go to Adam next. So Adam, this is perfect because we want to hear from an academic institution. And then we'll open the floor for questions.
Yes, so I think the challenge, especially for smaller institutions, when you have the large universities, they have the connections, whether it's at the state level. And I kind of want to go on what John was talking about. Is the smaller the business is, the smaller the institution is, the more that they're going to focus at the local level. They're going to want to know who the connection at the local fire department, the connection at the local police department, the connection at their local emergency management. And sometimes they struggle with the connections further up, whether it's to the region, whether it's to the state, and whether it's to the federal level. So being able to have connections, to be able to reach out, whether it's through an organization like the P3 here that can help them get to those higher levels, really works, because I've seen colleagues within the state of Florida that are at the smaller institutions that are amazed by some of the things that we've been able to do here in Region 4 because we have connections with the RDSTF that puts us in connections with the state level, that can put us in connections with federal entities, and they're lacking that within their region because they've only been able to get to the local entities, and they don't have the resources or the ability to connect with these groups that are putting them in touch at the higher level. So the associations, the emergency management groups, whether it's a private organization or it's a public association that's helping out, really can be critical for helping these small to medium range institutions or businesses be able to reach higher up into the government, to be able to get a better common operating picture of what's occurring, or to further their ability to get resources within their area.
Great, thank you. Yes, sir.
Just say real quick, I'm Lee Mayfield with Lee County Emergency Management. One of my biggest takeaways from this week is going to be, I think, and I hope as we evolve this process, we'll kind of dig into it a little more. The delegation of what the different levels of government are doing as relates to this coordination. We all talk about the collaboration, and when I go back to my office tomorrow and I sit down and kind of get a task list together of where we want to go in Lee County, I want to make sure I have a good idea of what the state's doing, what the feds are doing, and how we, don't duplicate that effort. That's big for us at the local level. And just to stress again the role of the local EOC during the response phase. We don't own fire trucks in local EM. We don't own police vehicles. We don't own ambulances. But we spend our careers building relationships. So we get it. We want this. We want it to happen, and that's what we do. So if we don't, proceed on this front, then we're crazy. So that's really what we focus on throughout our careers. We haven't had a storm in 9 or 10 years, and we've spent every week in the office trying to figure out how to push forward on issues like this. So we look forward to getting back to the office and building those relationships.
Well said. I mean, emergency management, we're the coordinators, the connectors of the dots. And so I want those dots out there in the private sector that in the next few minutes to hear from you. Where do you want to plug in? How do you see this going in 2015? Because it needs to be a we as a team here going forward. So yes, from Waffle House.
Phil, first of all, I'm not going to say anything controversial today. Matter of fact, I just made up with John Ward last night next to the Dolphins anchor, very romantic, but I think we're planning to play County Escape later on. None of this would exist without forward-thinking folks like yourself, Tim in Texas, Fugate, in Washington, your governor, Rick Scott, the people that he surrounds himself like a director that are willing to reach out to the private sector. And that's refreshing to see from the private sector standpoint. We just want to continue that open dialogue because all we do here at Waffle House particularly, most of our associates that work for us are hourly associates. We have over 40,000 people that work for us and they're all hourly associates. So when we talk about Waffle House, we're not talking about a giant corporation. We're talking about little people that, provide those deals a day to folks that really need that help. So we appreciate the ability to dialogue with you guys. Once we know that government's not the enemy, once we start hearing from people that want to talk to us, we're willing to share our ideas of what is successful because we have done this for so long. And we're willing to talk to other private sectors like the Publix people that I met today and share our ideas so that we can then just keep networking. And that's the goal. Network, continue the dialogue. At some point, let's bring in the public safety folks in the loop to get their input as well.
Great, thank you. Others from the private sector? Chuck, go ahead from the state of Florida.
Chuck Hagan, I'm the state logistics chief. I just wanted to kind of highlight the importance of this. When we activated the state EOC, we created what's called the Joint Logistics Operations Group. And this goes back to 2001. And then essentially, beside having the state agencies on this joint logistics group that provide direct services, the NGOs like Red Cross, Salvation Army, the Department of Defense, FEMA, Army Corps of Engineers. We also have our contractors that we've awarded contracts to. And it's a requirement that they have a representative in the state EOC, the logistics center that we have in Orlando, and potentially downrange at our staging areas depending upon it. So we have representatives from multimodal, from ICE, meals, water, heavy equipment, base camps, medical services, FNSS recently. And we've also brought in members from the Florida Retail Federation going back to 2004 and recently working with Kathy Fulton, bringing in Alan in recent years from that sector. And what we do twice a day is we sit down and we look at the critical issues that are facing the operation and working as a group between government, nonprofit, and business sector on how we as a team, as a joint operations team, address these issues regardless of who has that resource or that capability. That's what goes on the table. And then that's the direction that we move forward and our recommendation going forward to the director as to how best to address those issues. So that's, we've been doing this for quite some time and it works really, really well and it engages our business sector. Now we're not engaging, the individual retailer in a specific community. We're dealing on a much higher level. But it shows the collaboration that's so important for any emergency operations to work as one joint unified team and to address the issues.
Thank you, Chuck. We're going to go to Raymond James here and then back there to Ken with the NGO.
Thanks. So I was just looking up this slide real quick, and we were talking about where do we want to be engaged, and we haven't spent a whole lot of time talking about that level. I mean, information sharing has come up, but one of the things that we've been successful at doing at Raymond James when we're trying to bridge that gap and extend our hand is, one, present to the EMA what we're doing within Raymond James business continuity, emergency management, crisis management, if you will, to ensure that our associates are safe? What levels of preparedness or what kind of activities are we taking with as a firm to ensure that that local community EMA can be assured that we're doing what we need to do to make sure that that business can recover? So that's one of the first things that we do is present to them and say, this is what we're doing. Now, how can you help us do it better? And so then that gets tied back into opportunities to share information on training and exercising, getting plugged into whatever they've got down the road, whether or not that can increase our awareness as to other hazards in there. It's a reach out and an extension of the emergency planning that we're doing for Raymond James is to better understand what the local EMA is planning for, what they consider their threats and their hazards. Can we bake that into our planning methodologies and make sure that we're communicating the same thing across the platform? It's not a broad brush HVA that we're doing for our 430 locations. It's very pinpointed at what's going on in Boston or what's going on in Houston and understanding the dynamics that are at stake there. And I think that's some of the things, the values that added back into the broader business continuity program for the private sector.
Ken.
And I appreciate all the efforts you're talking about at the local level, but I think that you have an opportunity to also engage when there are situations happening in other places. And so one of the ways is that how can you help kind of concept. The fact that you have a used clothing drive in front of your storefront in Miami for an operation that's happening up in Detroit is not necessarily very helpful. But there are ways that you can help, and you all can be talking about how you can help and have a consistent message. The other thing is that I think it's an opportunity for you to say, okay, what if it had happened in our neighborhood instead of up in Detroit or whatever? And so it's a point where you can engage those local people that you've been knocking on their doors and saying, we can help, we can help you be mentors, we can help you with plans and so on and so forth. But they had a deaf ear. But at the time of the event, it's an opportunity to say, remember when we talked about this? Now let's operationalize that, because if this disaster had happened in your neighborhood, would you have been ready like those folks up there are not ready? And just an opportunity. So two opportunities. How can we help? And then how can we make sure that we're engaging those people you may have had a hard time with?
That's a good point. Yes. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
I spoke earlier, Cynthia Johnson from Pinellas County Economic Development. I spoke earlier about our business assistance program, and through the conversation, I heard a lot about communication and coordination. What we've found that with a liaison program is the execution is where the activity occurs, and that's also a lot of times where there is no activity. It's in the execution of these plans that we are developing, this information sharing that we are generating the databases from. What I found to be successful is we have a monthly lunch and learn. And so this is how the public sector partners with the private sector, utilizing industry, the chamber, and the county to come in. And each month we rotate at a public or a private sector facility and talk about best practices, the latest thing coming up, what's on the horizon, so that those professionals who are now liaisons are better equipped to give relevant information when they go out into those communities. We're fortunate in Pinellas County of having 24 municipalities and wonderful industry partners that I can go to Raymond James one month and then go to Home Shopping the next month, and then go to the Oldsmar Chamber the next month. But the exposure of programs and things like that you get from the constant movement in the community, just knowing what's in that community, really does a better job at equipping the professionals who are doing liaison programs with giving relevant information. And then when they're not at that one day a month meeting, they have the entire rest of the month to share that gained knowledge with the community. It then becomes a vehicle of information that does not just sit on the shelf, but has legs and a voice, because as you talk to Like my program was set up with cities and chambers and the county. So I had the county outlet, I had the city outlet, and then I had the chamber outlet to share all of this information. And you have that dedicated professional who's there in those specific communities saying, well, did you know when I went to Raymond James they have this? Or did you know when I went up to Tarpon Springs they're doing this? As it relates to different kinds of information sharing. And I did just want to say one thing to Larry when he asked about how can we better access and get information to the small business. We have got to devise a way to communicate with them. They communicate through their phones, through mobile and wireless applications. Many of them run their business based on mobile and wireless applications. We meet them where they are. That's where they are, that's where they're communicating, and that's where we can use members of the network like the SBDC. You have facilities, you have trained professionals, it doesn't cost anything. You partner with the industry. We've had a partnership with Elliott, and they sponsored our Ernie bags. We did a conference. You bring us in together, we have the conversation, but then if we don't execute the information received, we all just had a nice lunch. You know, and though it may be better than the peanut butter lunch we're having today, I think that it just values everyone's time, and we all have to really respect the fact that we have to make sure there's a return on the investment for everyone involved. And if you do relevant execution plans, you will have that return on the investment.
Here's what we're going to do, because Evan's been on panels, he hasn't spoken, so I'm going to do Evan. The gentleman in the back has been very patient, and then you're going to do closing comments, so we can get back on schedule, because 12:15 is supposed to be lunch, and we don't want to keep pushing the day back. So, Evan, you, then we'll go to the back, and then our friend from the American Red Cross will finish this up here in the next few minutes.
Thanks a lot, and I won't keep us from our peanut butter lunch, believe me. I think that the comments from my colleague were extremely relevant, and I just want to remind everybody as the recovery chief that we're not, things can't just end when the EOC closes down. The EOC closes down 3 weeks or thereabouts, somewhere in that range, after an event happens. Well, recovery takes months, years, and everybody is very rah-rah. We are all in an excited, adrenaline-filled state as the event is happening and immediately thereafter. We need to keep this momentum and be able to keep this momentum going for potentially months, if not years, because, we heard a comment earlier that the Verizons, the Waffle Houses, the Walmarts are kind of like, let us get back to business and we'll be okay. We'll bring our own power. We'll do things like that. Fine. Fantastic, in fact. But as you said, the small businesses, as we get 6 months out after a disaster, that 5% loss in business may become a crushing thing, a crushing burden to the small businesses that are scraping along on such slim margins. So as a group here, I think that where we need to take this at some point in the future is talking about how to maintain these momentums, and remembering that the mentoring program is great, but it doesn't just end when the EOC stops. It needs to continue, and these kind of plans, you mentioned hey, I got an 80% plan for you, here you go. That may not be even relevant to the small business until they realize in 4 months after the disaster, I'm in the red, and I'm seriously in the red here. What do I do? So that's the only comment I have. Go peanut butter, rah-rah.
All right, quickly to the back. Yes, sir.
Yeah, one of the things that Steve didn't mention is that when the EOC, the Tampa, City of Tampa, and the Hillsborough EOC activates, he sits in that office and provides one voice, not only through ACP, who he stays in contact with, but with other organizations in the region. One example was during the RNC, there were incidents that affected businesses over here in Pinellas County that we were able to funnel communication back and forth through us to that organization, through that EOC, through Steve. And the seat on the board there, or in the EOC, is an ACP seat.
Great. I yield the floor to you, sir. You are the door to lunch.
before the dash to the peanut butter. Okay, just something that, it was a common theme in some of the sessions about the small businesses, and you have them on the radar, but they're really not subscribing to many of the services and getting the information. They're too busy running their businesses. But the NGOs have a lot of contact with those small businesses. They're the vendors that are supplying, for example, enough food for initial startup for a shelter and so on, and supplies, other things. That's the first contact in the community, and we do that year-long, steady state. That fire that we had last week, or the one that's happening tonight, and we need to feed, those are the vendors we're touching, and we do two things. We're reaching them on a couple of levels. The individuals who are in the community with community disaster education. So they're learning about preparedness because they attended some event, because they're members of the community. The second touch is when we talk to them about what can you do for us, that's a survey. How many meals can you serve? 500, 800, how quickly, when? 3 o'clock in the morning, one phone call? What if the lights go out? Can you serve us food? Yes, sure, no problem, I have a generator, and so on. That kind of discussion is what happens, goes on with mass care. So the government liaisons in your chapters and the contacts that many of you have with the Red Cross, you're probably on some of the boards. You're probably donors, you're active, you're connected. Share the information that you have with the liaisons and the mass care leads who are speaking to the vendors, because now I have some other things in mind that I'd like to push out to chapters to say, mention this to your key vendors. Are they just at that level that they might tip up to say, I'll log on to that site, I'm big enough, I'll check that out. But if not, what can they do to make themselves more resilient? There may be a community program or in the county that that vendor can link to. Inform the NGOs on how we can make the vendors more resilient, and we'll share that.
Thank you, perfect. And we're going to take a short break, and then lunch will be over there. Try to get over in the room adjoining this at 12:20.